Hello and welcome to week 2 for CMP 630, Network Security Audit and Forensics. My name is Dr. Chike P. Chike. I am the instructor and facilitator for this course. This week's topic is on Chapter 2, Overview of U.S. Compliance Laws. This chapter covers the following topics and concepts: requirements of public and private sector regulations, Federal Information Security Management Act FISMA, Sarbanes-Oxley Act SOX, Federal Trade Commission FTC, Children's Internet Protection Act CIPA, Children's Online Protection Act COPPA. Goals of Chapter 2. When you complete this chapter, you'll be able to describe the goals and requirements for key acts of Congress. Describe the goals and importance of the Federal Information Security Management Act. And also describe various regulations concerning protection of children, accounting, and other information. Introduction to regulations. Regulatory requirements exist at different levels. They include the state, federal, and international. In addition, industry consortiums propose requirements. It is important to know which regulation apply to your organization. This helps you to ensure you stay compliant and prevents you and your organization from trying to solve the same problem twice. In most cases, you should consult your corporate counsel or legal counsel to help identify which regulations apply to your organization. Regulatory Act of Congress. Congress enacts major legislation known as statutes. The President of the United States signs these acts of Congress into law. Such acts include the E-Government Act of 2002, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, and among others. After such acts become law, various government agencies create and enforce the federal regulations authorized by those acts. Examples of federal government agencies are the Food and Drug Administration, the Federal Communications Commission, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, and the National Security Agency, among others. Congress first passes a statute to address a problem such as social or economic issue. These are considered enabling legislation, which allows regulatory agencies to create the necessary regulations to implement the law. A regulatory agency is a public or government agency that has authority over some area of activity in a regulatory or supervisory capacity. For example, the FCC creates regulations under the Children's Internet Protection Act (CIPA). The Security Exchange Commission creates regulations under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Now let's look at the Federal Information Security Management Act of 2002, that's FISMA. FISMA is part of E-Government Act of 2002. It was created as a public law 107-347 as Title 3. FISMA tasked the National Institute of Standards and Technology (NIST) to develop and set standards and guidelines. FISMA regulations apply only to federal information systems, although state and local government and private organizations can also tap into the act, but it's not mandatory. It's only mandatory for federal information systems. FISMA grants the importance of sound information security practices and controls the interests of national security and the economic interests of the United States. It was amended in 2014 by Federal Information Security Modernization Act of 2014 to provide the following. Provide a framework for effective information security resources that support federal operations, data, and infrastructure. To accept the interconnectedness of information technology to ensure that effective risk management is in place. To facilitate the development and ongoing monitoring of required minimum controls to protect federal information systems and data. To provide for increased oversight of federal agency information security programs. Sarbanes-Oxley Act. This act is an act of 2002. It's also called SOX or SABOX, and it's a federal law. It was enacted as a result of the Public Company Account Reform and Investor Protection Act and Corporate Accountability and Responsibility Act. Sarbanes-Oxley dramatically changed how public companies do business in the United States. It adjusts the audit to account for the particular circumstances regarding the different size and complexities of companies. Encourages auditors to use professional judgment and risk assessment methodology. It also follows a principles-based approach to determining when and to what extent the auditor can use the work of others to obtain evidence about the design and effectiveness of the control. The purpose of FTC is to enforce the provisions of the Federal Trade Commission, which prohibits unfair or deceptive acts or practices in commerce. FTC is the Federal Trade Commission. The Clayton Antitrust Act of 1914 also granted the Federal Trade Commission, FTC, the authority to act against specific and unfair monopolistic practices. Mission is to prevent business practices that are anti-competitive or deceptive or unfair to consumers, to enhance informed consumer choice and public understanding of the competitive process. FTC can punish companies that fail to protect private information. It also imposes fines and requires external auditing for several years. Children's Internet Protection Act of 2000. SIPA, as it is called, was enacted by Act of Congress in 2000. It requires schools and libraries to certify compliance to implement an internet safety policy and technology protection measures. It includes implementing a safety policy and controls that address the following: access to minors to inappropriate material on the internet, safety and security of minors when using electronic communication such as email, chat rooms, and instant messaging, unauthorized access and unlawful activities by minors, unauthorized disclosure, use, and dissemination of personal information regarding minors. Measures restricting minors' access to harmful materials. Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, COPPA. This is a federal law designed to protect children. It is maintained and enforced by the Federal Trade Commission, FTC. COPPA requires websites and other online services aimed at children less than 30 years of age to comply with specific requirements of the law. COPPA compliance requires 6 steps. One, determine if company's website or online service collects personal information from children under 13. Post a privacy policy that complies with COPPA. Notify parents directly before collecting personal information from their children. Get parents verifiable consent before collecting information from their children. Honor parents' ongoing rights with respect to information collected from their kids. Implement exceptions to COPPA's verifiable parental consent requirement. This ends lecture 2 for week 2. At the end of this lecture, there is a research assignment. Students are required to write a 4-page paper, a minimum of 4-page paper, using APA format on the role of encryption in global e-commerce transactions. You have Amazon.com, you have eBay. Most of the transactions now are online. So how does that go? What does encryption play into those transactions that happen online? Do some research and come up with your line of argument on the role of encryption in global e-commerce transactions. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you on week 3. Bye.